Good evening, everybody. If I could welcome you to the first Pensions Committee of the year. That's a belated Happy New Year to everyone. Anyway, welcome. Okay, if we could, apologies for absence, I think.
We've had apologies for absence from Councillor Hayhurst. We have a couple of members who will be joining online, but I note they're not currently online at the moment, but I expect they'll be joining us momentarily.
Okay, thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Is there anything we haven't noted already to declare? Sorry, I couldn't hear that. Could you tell?
I receive a local government pension.
I'm a member of the Islington Pension Fund, which from whom I receive it.
We haven't been doing this recently, have we? I'm not sure what the varying bits of advice at varying bits of time. I'm a member of the Hackney Pension Scheme.
Just to clarify, Chair, we do have a bit. So we noted it at the beginning of the municipal year. We repeat that in the minutes every occasion.
Okay.
If members do want to, and I appreciate Councillor Troughton, it's one of your first meetings, I think, attending the committee. I said, just to be clear, we had a standing declaration from the beginning of the municipal year for members that have an LGPS pension fund or pension, and we repeat that in the minutes annually or at every meeting. So you don't need to declare at every meeting, we just make a note of it.
Okay, well, it's always best to be safe than sorry, isn't it? Any other declarations? If you remember, okay. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Chair, I'm a deferred member of the Hackney Pension Scheme.
Thank you, Margaret. Anyone else? Oh, we got that. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Oh, I should say, sorry, I should say right at the beginning, welcome back to our Head of Pensions, Rachel Cowburn, has come back up from maternity leave. So welcome, hello. Absolutely. Thank you. Congratulations and welcome back. Previous meeting. I don't propose to go through these page by page, but I will just pause for a second and say, are there any corrections or people are happy with us to agree that? I will take that as we can agree those as a true record. Okay, so agenda item 4. Now, the agenda is basically in two parts. We've got there's a batch of reports at the beginning, and then we've got the major part of the session is in the confidential section on about the actuarial valuation, where there's a brief training session and discussions about the assumptions around that, which we have to agree tonight. So if we could, and I think hopefully take about an hour for the first bits, and then we'll have a break between the two bits. Yeah, if that works. Okay then, so if we can move then to agenda item 4, quarterly update report. I think Mike Honeset's going to introduce this.
There we go. Sorry. Yes, the usual quarterly update report to Pensions Committee, giving a brief update on funding position, investment performance overall, responsible investment and administration. I think the first one to note is the funding update. I think in the report that you've received, it says that you'll get an update at the meeting. That was due to some of the analysis that I'd received needed a bit of checking. We've done that now, and I'm pleased to, well, I can tell you that the funding position is at the end of September was 105% funded. So that represents a slight fall from the quarter before, which was, I think, 107%. Largely the result of performance on the markets, etc., investment markets. Investment update. I think overall the funders produced overall positive returns of 1.4% for the quarter. Obviously not as strong as has been over the last year, but I think everyone's expecting that to tail off. But it is still slightly ahead of the benchmark for the fund. Most of the mandates across that we're in are actually produced positive returns. The exception for those was the RBC emerging markets and the GMO DGF funds, so it's diversified growth funds, and BMO bonds. I think it should be noted, of course, that we have in the current quarter, or in the quarter just gone, actually now fully divested from RBC emerging markets, and the GMO DGF was shortly after as well. So those two that didn't perform particularly well as part of our previously agreed investment strategy has been fully divested now. I think over the 12 months, as it says here, the funds outperformed the benchmark by about 1% and produced returns overall of about 16.3%. The 3-year returns are 7.8%, which is in line with the benchmark for the fund. Moving on to the investment strategy implementation. So I think at the last committee, I reported that we'd done a lot of the due diligence around a lot of the funds that we were about to move into with the London Civ. I can happy to say that we've now actually invested in and moved funds across from the BlackRock UK equity into the LSIF Paris Aligned Global Alpha Fund. And in addition, we've fully redeemed the RBC Emerging Market mandate and again moved that across to the LSIF Emerging Market Fund as agreed in the investment strategy that committee agreed earlier in the year. And then the transfers into the GMO Diversified Growth Fund, out of that and into the LSIV Diversified Growth Fund has actually happened in the following quarter along with Invesco. So we've pretty much finished the stage 1 of the implementation of the investment strategy around the movement of investments. And obviously now looking at some of the things around potential for bonds and other things that the London Civ might be able to offer. So it'll be coming to future committees with options around those. Responsible investment update. There's the usual appendix from the LAP quarterly engagement report is attached. I'm not intending to go through any detail in that. That's there for members' reference. I think the important thing is, in terms of responsible investment, is the work that's going on in the background at the moment to actually bring responsible investment policy to committee, along with the work around where we currently are with the fossil fuels, our target on the climate change, and the refresh target, which will be coming to a workshop in February and March committee. So that's happening in the background. In terms of pensions administration, case levels overall at Equinity have actually gone up. There's been a significant increase in cases between September and November. We believe that's because of more queries around members received their annual benefit statements and it's queries around those, etc. We do normally expect to see those people querying, obviously, some of the figures that they might have received if they're not happy with those. I'm glad that people do query them because it's always best to do it now rather than when your pension's due to come into payment. So that's a good sign that people are querying them. In terms of the SLAs and KPIs, I think Equinity were pretty much on target very close to target for all measures around September to October. November, they're slightly down, but that's again because of the peak in cases. So they'll pick that back up now. They're feeding through on those. There's all the usual chart, the more detailed actually set out in the report around those. I think that's all I want to say in terms of the actual work. There's Karen McWilliam, she should be online, is going to give an update on some of the projects that are in here because they're, yeah. So I'll hand over to Karen to do that one.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Chair, and happy 2022 to you all. So can I just check you can hear me okay? Yes, I'm seeing some nods. Thank you. So first of all, there's been a number of projects that are ongoing, mainly been driven by Equinity. The first one is an address tracing and verification exercise. This relates to members in the scheme, and they have been trying to identify addresses for members where they're not sure where those members now live. So they've made quite good progress with them, and the figures are on page 9 of the report. The latest update is of the 500 cases where they had to manually look back and identify old addresses. Equinity have now been able to identify new addresses for about half of those cases. So there's been good progress since the report was written. Moving on to the pension saving statements, if you recall from the last meeting, there was an issue with about 23 pension saving statements. It actually related to the year before, but then because it impacted on the year before, then this year's ones had to be checked as well. So I can confirm that all of those have now been rectified and issued. And as far as we're aware at this point in time, there's been no complaints from any of the members. And I think I did say to the committee at the last meeting that I didn't foresee any of them being major differences or having a major impact on the scheme members. In relation to the McLeod programme, if you recall, the scheme is having to review quite a substantial number of scheme member records as a result of an equalisation case. So major progress has been made. The key focus at the moment is trying to get data from employers because we have to update benefit calculations for members who have already left the scheme, and also update all the records for people who are still in the scheme. So it's a case of writing out to all the employers and asking for more information about part-time hours worked, going back a number of years, and also service breaks in the scheme. So the key challenge at the moment is getting all that information from the employers, and good progress has been made there, as well as for some of the other work streams. It's a bit behind schedule, but actually the government hasn't yet issued the required legislation to do the benefit rectification piece of the exercise, so it's definitely not a concern, and we're probably well ahead of a number of LGPS funds in this area. And then moving on to the guaranteed minimum pension reconciliation exercise. So you'll recall, hopefully most of you from the last committee meeting, there was about 500 pensioners where, as a result of this exercise, and I should point out, no fault of Hackney Pension Fund, they were either having to have reductions or increases in their pension payments going forward. And most of these were actually reductions in the pension. So obviously we were quite concerned about how this would impact the pensioners and the dependents involved. So all these changes were done prior to Christmas. And there's been a number of queries ongoing, but actually there's been no complaints as far as we're aware at this point in time. So we're given it's a very difficult exercise to carry out. We're relatively pleased that there doesn't seem to be anyone of any major concerns about the changes in their pensions, and they're all being dealt with quite well with Equinity. There was a concern at the last pension committee about how Equinity had put a sort of standard message in their answer phone rather than actually someone speaking to the pensioners. It was a message saying, can you please write in with your query? So I can confirm that almost that definitely was removed, that message, and everyone was getting a chance to speak to someone if they had any queries, and then they're being dealt with. So that was all I was going to say about the projects, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, should we finish the rest of the report and then go back through it in stages, I think? Yeah, that's probably the easiest way to deal with it. Otherwise we're jumping all over the place. Thank you very much, Karen. Michael?
So the remainder of the report was just about reporting breaches, and I'm pleased to say we had no breaches to report in the last quarter. So I think that's covered everything that's in the paper.
Okay, I had just one quick, risk. I mean, we don't specifically cover risk as a heading in this report. Can you remind me how we're going to deal with that?
So if you remember, we did last time we did risk, we did a separate report on risk register, and we're intending to update that as a separate item. Probably, well, we've got business planning meeting next week, so we'll set out exactly when that will come to the committee.
So we just go. Obviously, we need to regularly go through our risk register, don't we?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we can talk about that. Okay, then. So, can I ask then, if you just take this through this report in the major headings, are there any questions or comments about the investment strategy part of the report? No. Can I just? We don't scream out our funding level in here in the way we normally do. Is there a reason for that?
No, so I covered that in my introduction. We're at 105% at the end of the quarter. There was an issue with some of the papers I received which contradicted one another, so I did some work with the actuary, etc., to sort that out, and we're at 105%, which is slightly down from 107 last quarter.
Okay. Yeah, can we note that? Yeah. Sorry, we've got questions now. Councillor Sharman, and then.
Thank you. Just on the investment returns, I note the good news that we're ahead of the projections, but I just wanted to raise the issue you've referred to, which is going forward, what are the risks attached? And it would be good to know where we're going to be able to see those and to evaluate them.
So you'll see them as part of the investment strategy going forward. So there's all sorts of work going on around obviously the actuary valuation, and we'll be looking at investment strategy again as part of that for any changes that need to be made in line with the funding strategy that's agreed. Obviously we continue to look at them ongoing as part of this report, and if anything comes out or is a worry, then the investment advisors would flag that with us straight away. For example, the Invesco one that I said we divested from, we were originally going to hold on to that for a little bit longer to fund some of the capital drawdowns, but the investment advisors, it was becoming clear that we might end up as one of the last investors in that fund, and we didn't want to be in that position because it could end up with illiquid assets. So we redeemed that straight away and holding the cash in short bond fund to fund capital drawdown. So it's something we continue to look at. It will come to committee as part of those investment strategy papers, etc., and also the risk register when we bring that again.
You're happy with that, Nick?
Well, I was looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me we're steering ourselves into some difficult economic circumstances going forward. And do we know that our current investment strategy will be robust to that? It's clearly been successful in a relatively benign equity position over the last year. That's by no means certain. And I just really wanted to know when we can understand, and in a form we can understand whether this strategy is robust.
Okay, well, yeah, okay. Can we bring in Andrew Johnson, our investment advisor from Hyman's? Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I think probably in addition to what Michael said with regard to the strategy, so on a triennial basis, we do a sort of deep dive into the strategy. And at the moment, the strategy's got a balance of growth, income, and protection-oriented assets. And within each of those three categories, we've also got a diversified allocation across either regional equities, DGF funds, property mandates, private debt mandates, infrastructure, and bond mandates. So in order to navigate some of the potential volatility associated with markets, one of the ways to do that is via the diversified portfolio that is suitable for the funding of position of the scheme. On an ongoing basis, we retain a disciplined approach to sort of retaining the allocation and monitoring that within the quarterly reports. I think the sustained positive performance we've seen from equity markets has been, I guess, if we think about what's happened within the investment strategy over the past, say, 6 years, the equity allocations come down from around 80% to about 65%. We've introduced some of those more predictable income-focused mandates, such as private lending, which has gone from 0% to targeting 20% at this point in time, albeit we're building that allocation over a number of years. And also the renewables infrastructure mandate, which initially was 0% also, and is targeting 5%. We're probably going to take a couple of years also to get into that. So recognizing some of the positive tailwinds that have driven some of the funding improvements over recent, sort of the past, say, 5 years, diversifying away from the equity assets, moving into the income strategies, and making sure we review that on at very least a 3-yearly basis. And we will be doing that. We did that around 18 months ago, and we will be doing some of that. We'll talk about a little bit later on, and we'll also see that in the March meeting. And then whenever we come to actually the detailed granular considerations of any evolution or changes to the investment strategy, we'll do that again in the June meeting. So I think it's a constant journey. And if we look back even just over the past 5 years, we have reduced the equity allocation and introduced some of those more predictable income-focused mandates, and that's something we'll look to do as the funding position hopefully continues to move in the right direction.
Thank you. Yeah, I won't ask you a question. Councillor Desmond.
I'm still reasonably satisfied with the 105%, even though it's not 107%. I once said to a Marks and Spencer's manager when I was a junior trainee, actually I was a senior trainee, wasn't I? What's 2% between friends? And he didn't take it very well, but that was in the 1970s. But anyway, that's by the by. What I want to know is whether we've looked at our liabilities in the context of the huge hike in inflation. It's now apparently at a 30-year high, something like 5.4%. So we're saying 105% funded, but have we taken account of the increase in inflation in determining what funding we require?
We're going to cover that later to some degree, aren't we? In the last time.
The updated fund does look at obviously the current markets, etc., and the current conditions. So we'll take account of some of that definitely. But we certainly are covering that in a lot of detail later on. So yeah.
Councillor Gordon.
Thanks, Chair. I was going to ask more or less the same question about inflation. So I've got another question about GMPs, but I don't think we're there yet.
Okay, we can come on to that. Any questions on the responsible investment update? Councillor Jarman again?
Yeah. No, I'm just really interested in the lap fee report because it speaks a lot about dialogue, which sounds good. I guess the reassurance that from your own experience, Chair, that these dialogues do lead to some outcomes which aren't so easily picked up from this report. The specific one I was interested in was the one on the Palestine issue, where it actually says the companies are treading a thin line between legality and illegality in their conduct, and this margin is not acceptable to lap fee. And I'm just interested what the...
Sorry, which committee was that?
This is the company engagement report from lap fee. Quarterly engagement report.
Yeah, which sorry,
I think it's...
Oh God.
Well, no, this is lap fee. It's a red flag to lap fee that the companies. This was actually the occupied Palestine, which they note a couple of companies. Altc and Altice and
Yeah.
Booking Holdings. And I guess what it sounds that we're being told that it's illegitimate, and therefore it's obviously important for us to know what's being done about that. But it's a more general question about whether I think, remarkably comprehensive dialogue, which this report is leading, these dialogues that it talks about extensively are leading to real outcomes. And I'm really tapping into your experience from this.
Oh yeah, well, the dialogue's real, and as like most dialogues, some of them are more successful than others. But yeah, there are real benefits. And just the Palestinian one is quite. I've not been involved directly in that myself, but there are there's quite a lot of interesting issues going on being pursued, and what it is coming to the fore a bit more in the way that initially some companies were reluctant to talk to us, and now I think that's beginning to open up. As I think generally the community sort of understands that there's a sort of investment risk in all this, as well as obviously concerns. So yeah, but that's going to be quite a hard slog, I won't go into huge detail there, but I think the general answer is yes. I am particularly involved in a couple of climate action 100 plus initiatives, which is like the sort of global alliance of investors engaging with the top emitters of greenhouse gases to get them to move towards net zero. And I've particularly been involved in the ArcelorMittal and the National Grid, which have been both a bit seen movements in both of them, particularly ArcelorMittal, which is the world's biggest steel company, who over the course of a couple of years have gone from not quite there's nothing we can do about this until there's international legislation and proper tax adjustments, which is like the position of, I better be careful what I say here, the chairman, and but now they're much more engaged in the whole process. Are probably one of the leaders at introducing hydrogen into steel smelting. A long way to go on all of these things, but I think it does make a real difference. So yeah. I mean, I think LATFIS for what it cost us is a fantastic sort of bargain. Well, I would say that because I'm vice chair of it.
But I mean, I guess a reassurance, perhaps in these LATFI reports, about real progress, the sort of thing you've just talked about. It would be really helpful to have that as an update, because I'm aware that companies are getting much smarter about their PR. They recognise now that they need to say something. And some of these reports sound as if they're just being smart about their PR, not really taking it seriously.
Yeah, that's true in some cases.
Yeah, I'm sure. And it would be therefore good to have LATFI's report to say a little more about real achievements. I mean, they talk about achievements in terms of dialogue, fine, absolutely necessary first step, but getting some outcomes would be good. And I would like some sort of report on a question of LATFI's point about the margin is not acceptable. The idea that we are treading a thin line between legality and illegality seems to me something that should concern us.
Okay, I'll take that back. They do. I'll come just I can't go on too long on this, but they do. There's a weekly chairs update and from LATF, and there's a regular other reports which I can arrange for all members to get actually. If you want them, certainly I'll send you. I'll email everyone round and invite them to those. They're much more useful. Okay, sorry, Councillor Billington.
Right, I magically did it. Okay, yeah, it's on the issue that Councillor Sharman has raised in relation to that report. I note that a significant amount of the outcomes on the engagement simply says dialogue, and that's great, but it's only a start. And I particularly note, this is in the chart towards the bottom, on page 9, the company progress report, that a significant amount of this seems to indicate that the conversations on climate change seem to be at their beginning in that it's sent correspondence, and therefore the outcome is dialogue as distinct from meetings. Is this the case that this is basically the beginning of conversations about climate, or is this the fact that correspondence has been sent again and again and again, and we're not really getting substantial moves on this? This is the 4B quarterly update, and I'm looking at pages 8, where the meeting engagement outcomes, you've got 75% of them is dialogue, and I think it's about 2% is moderate improvement, 3% substantial improvement. I know this is like pushing water uphill, but I'd just like to get a sense of where we are in the process of shifting those dialogue outcomes into something more substantive.
It's in the LAP report again.
The shiny one with Rio Tinto's ink on the front page,
the LAP
4B, quarterly update
report
report, appendix 2. Page 9, company progress report, has got a whole list of all the companies that LAPFI is engaging with, and page 8 above that has got meeting engagement outcomes, which is the third graph down. Dialogue seems to constitute 75% of the outcomes of meetings, and moderate improvement, substantial improvement between them, about 5% max. So my question is, and then on page 9, the climate change ones seem to be mostly the outcomes of dialogue, and the activity seems mostly to be sent correspondence. My question is it sending correspondence because we're beginning the engagement, and so we are saying the outcome is dialogue, in that they may or may not have sent us a letter back saying we note it, or yes, come for a meeting? Or is this that we've been sending letters in for ages, and they're just and they're just saying yes, thanks, rather than actually making progress?
Depends on the topic, but most of that's continuing.
Issue of climate specifically, because I note that on that chart, sent correspondence, climate change and dialogue is the most dominant set of outcomes on those 3 columns.
I think both of those things are true for, occasionally it's new firms have come into it, and we've started increasingly talking to, for instance, insurance companies we started engaging with last year, and we hadn't really been focusing too much on insurance companies until those and their role in financing, issues. I think, but other occasions, on other occasions, it is slow, but the dialogue is seen as a positive thing while it continues.
Can I suggest to that, because this is really useful information, that we then disaggregate between in terms of, so that we can see where we are in that engagement in the pipeline. Is this an initial approach, or is this ongoing dialogue? Which ones are which? Because if you've only just started, then I'll give them a bit of a buy. If we've been sending them letters for 10 years, that's not a successful campaign from our perspective, and it might be time to withdraw.
Yes, it's a good point. I'll pull that off.
Yeah, in a similar vein, really, the engagement topics, I mean, are completely dominated by climate change, which is fine, but how are these topics, prioritised? Are they prioritised by the companies, or is it LAP that prioritises them? Is it's unclear to me why that has featured so highly, compared to other topics.
Prioritise 2 ways, really. In terms of the companies, but by what the local government pension fund members of LAP own. So which companies we have the biggest investments in and which ones we own, so we can prioritise those as one. And topics are decided by LAP's executive committee in consultation, was quite a wide consultation process, which happens at the beginning of the, just happening now, I think. I don't know, Michael, they've written to Michael.
Requested data from holdings, etc. So they're starting the process of updating who and where they're engaging, etc. Based on, as Councillor Chapter says, based on funds holdings across LGPS.
And there's a detailed work programme produced. I mean, LAF has members' meetings quarterly, and again, I think there's, there's absolutely, if members wanted to attend, I could make details of those, and you're very welcome, to attend and make your points directly to the executive and the officers there as well. The officers to answer all those questions next time. So, anything else on responsible investment? And all the admin. I think, Margaret, were you going to ask a question on?
Yeah, it was a question on GMPs on page 12. Sorry, page 12 of the annual report. I note there is some further work to do done, I think, in some more complicated cases about members becoming entitled to GMP before state pension age and survivor pensioners. And I just wondered how big the discrepancies were. I mean, it's obviously good to hear that the reconciliation's been done in relation to the original group, although I do recall from a previous pensions meeting that there were a couple of fairly substantial discrepancies in relation to that. I just wondered whether they ended up being sort of, I mean, certainly in terms of underpayments, how that's all sort of panned out, and so what sort of adjustments will be made to the pensions in payment. I mean, because obviously, some of the adjustments could have quite a significant impact on those incomes, particularly with in the light of the cost of living crisis and the the other pressures on household incomes, as well as inflation, which we've already referenced.
Okay, do you want me to pick that one up, Chair?
Please, let's start to say what's coming first. Karen.
Okay, so Councillor Gordon, so I don't have, I touched my fingertips, I don't have individual cases, and I'm happy to circulate something else. For the new cases that have not yet been written to, we do not yet have that information, and we can include that in a future committee report once we have that information. I'm more than happy to do that. The information in relation to the magnitudes of the underpayment and overpayments was included, I think, two committee reports ago, and I understand it's very similar to that. In total, for the underpayments, there was arrears paid of about £61,000, £62,000. There was overpayments. So just to put it in context, the total reductions across approximately 400 pensioners was £175,000. So it was still quite substantial. And I know obviously some were small and some were larger, but I'm happy to circulate some separate information with some of the details of the cases that have already been adjusted, and then bring information back to a future meeting for the cases that are still being calculated.
Yeah, and thank you very much. There's probably not much further we can go, but I mean, obviously, if there's a very, there could be significant impacts on pensioners' incomes, so it would be good to hear a bit more about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chair, it looks like Jonathan might have a follow-on question.
Yeah, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Karen. As scheme member representative, I'd be very interested to receive your efforts, Karen, please. I think it's quite important I'm kept aware of the details of this GMP reconciliation. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'll be happy to circulate that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sharman, I think it's the last question on this.
Yeah, just a general point about the performance. A couple of meetings ago, there was some concerns expressed about the administration performance. And though I note that there's a feeling that it's improving, it has fallen still below in a number of respects, and which I, by the way, find quite hard to follow without the colour code being printed. Why we still resist printing in colour in today's world, so members can actually interpret this, I find a bit bewildering. But I think, even though it's all in greys, that we are underperforming on some of the issues, particularly in November. And I guess the question I've got is, are we convinced that our monitoring and performance improvement program to make sure they do perform to our expectations is robust and has an endpoint where we can say, right, we now find your performance fully acceptable?
Okay. Again, Chair, do you want me to pick up this point?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So first of all, if I may, I also noticed the black and white printed copies do not work for the lovely new coloured graphs. So we'll work and trying to find a way around that if we can't get colour printed copies, which I think it sounds like that's not the standard. So in relation, first of all, in relation to the performance of Equinity, and we've had issues in the past, there has actually been some changes at the Equinity team, and they've put in place a new, I've probably got this title wrong, client manager. And I must admit, he has come in a bit like a Tasmanian devil, and really made some excellent progress in sort of turning things around. Some things that we've noticed have maybe been going on for a few months, he's actually been able to turn them around and get them rectified, and we're getting a lot of assurance about how he's continuing to improve things. So it actually feels probably in the most positive place from what I see than it has in a couple of years. So I'm definitely feeling a lot more positive about that, and I know that Lucy, the Pensions Administration Manager, is, and I hope that Michael's also nodding his head there, because I can't see him at the moment. The second point in relation to the specific levels that you're referring to, I think just to put them in context, annual benefit statements obviously is a massive exercise. So you always do expect some increase in queries at this time of the year. And so to put it in the context, they've actually been doing pretty well on all their service standards. And it is because we're pretty sure it's because of the spike in cases that therefore they've just had a couple of months, they've been a little bit lower. But in the magnitude of things, we actually believe they're doing a really good job there. The Pensions Administration Manager has monthly formal meetings with them, but also has more informal meetings on a regular basis and considers all of this on an ongoing basis. So I can assure you she's completely on top of it all on an ongoing basis. Okay, and again, Chair, I can see Jonathan is waving his hand.
I've got to ask if Michael wanted to add anything first, actually.
Yeah,
then Jonathan, I'll come back to you, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we've actually got a meeting with Equinity on Monday, to actually go through. So they've been working on some documents to change some of their process, because they recognise that there were some issues that we've been discussing with them for a while. We've got a meeting with them on Monday to actually go through to start looking at some of their new processes that Karen's already indicated are starting to prove successful, but about the way they work as an organisation as well. I think they've recognised that, if you like, we see too many different parts of the organisation, and they're trying to bring it together so that we've got one point of contact and we can see it as one organisation. And it certainly seems to be, so far, we've seen a big improvement in both what's coming through and the engagement with us as the contractors.
You know, it's quite concerning. This has been going on for 2 years, and we still are not being able to answer my question, which is, when can we expect them to be consistently hitting their performance expectations?
I think generally on the business as usual, they are. I've always said this, they are pretty good anyway. The issue's been on special projects, and that's what they're focusing on now. And obviously over the last couple of years, we can't get away from the fact we had COVID, which hit them. They dealt with that not particularly well at the beginning. They've picked back up and put things in place. as saying they're now working towards changing their overall processes to actually bring those improvements through. So I'd hopefully very soon be able to say that they're actually meeting all their targets, I'd hope.
Hello, Chair.
Well,
Hello,
if
Chair.
we're gonna- hang on a second, Jonathan.
I must say this because Karen, Michael, and Councillor Sharman have pointed out Equinity is improving, but we are not a lapdog. We are paying them good money. We want to get a good service. I mentioned at the last meeting, the lack of ABSs is not acceptable. We need to hold them to account.
Okay, that's been very firmly put. You're meeting them on Monday, you're saying? If you could express our concerns and we'll report back to the future committee. I mean, there is the option of actually asking them to come here if that's appropriate.
Yeah, I mean,
if there's not a clear, but
I did ask them to, they did attend pensions board last time to explain the issue on, I asked them to attend there around the ABSs, but quite happy to invite them here to actually explain what they're doing in terms of improvements, etc.
would we like them to be invited to a future committee to put these points to them directly ourselves? Okay, can we arrange to do that? Could note the report and move on. Thank you very much. Brings us to item 5, CMA objectives. Competitions and Marketing Authority.
So I think at the last committee, we, in retrospect, partly agreed the objectives because a lot of work had gone on over the year about updating the objectives for the investment advisors. There's a requirement to actually report to the CMA that we've fulfilled the requirements to set objectives for the investment advisors and actually monitor them. So this paper sets out a statement that we need to submit to say that we've complied with the requirements, and the appendix 1 actually sets out, against the objectives that are agreed, evidence of the advisors actually meeting each of the requirements set out by the fund. I wasn't intended to go through it in detail one by one, but happy to answer any questions.
Okay, are there any questions on this report? Can we then note it and approve the submission? Thank you very much. So that's item 6 and the annual report of the pension. Sorry. The annual report of the Pensions Committee to the Council. Michael, do you want to say?
Yep, so I've just lost my, just bear with me, sorry. Right, so the annual report of the Pensions Committee is obviously, well, I think Councillor Chapman's presenting it to Council next week, is it? I think. Pending approval of this evening. So basically this sets out the work of the Pensions Committee over the last year. And it is a requirement, obviously, as a committee of the council to actually report to the council what the committee's done over the last year. So the report basically sets out various things. One is obviously committee membership and attendance. I'll go through briefly each part. Committee membership and attendance, setting out who's attended each meeting, both the actual meeting and the training. Probably the most important part is the work undertaken during 2021, and it sets out the work around compliance, governance and administration, compliance with we've obviously the committee looked at compliance with the Regulators Code of Practice and continued to feature on the agenda throughout 2021. As we know, various committees, we've talked about the issues with member data and the fact that the Hackney payroll in particular, the data that goes from there across to the fund being an issue. This sets out really that lots of work has happened over the last year, and we're basically at the back end of actually finally having a working interface that actually will feed directly into the pensions system on an automated process. I'm hoping over the next week, I've got a meeting again next week, and we're really at the back end of sorting out business as usual to get that actually running into the live process. It goes on to talk about investments and asset allocation. So again, as you know, we did a lot of work in 2021 about agreeing the investment strategy, which I spoke about earlier, actually the implementation of that. And this sets out the returns for the year up to the March 21. So basically the fund returned 25.6% for the year, which outperformed its benchmark by 3.4. So definitely a good year. Obviously, we all know that equities have performed particularly strongly over that last year. So that's the major element of that. In terms of LGPS structural reform and the London Civ, so during 2021 itself, there was lots of work again going on about talking to the Civ about things that we could actually invest in with them, but no, we didn't actually make any further allocations. They've all happened in the current financial year as part of that investment strategy was agreed. So this just sets out the work that's carried on with the Civ around there. Moving on to section 3.5 on responsible investment. I think this sets out again the work that we've done around the investment strategy and moving into some more sustainable mandates. Obviously picks up on the work around the fossil fuel target and where we got to that at that stage. And the fact that we're still obviously continue to be an active member of LAPF, and we've had that discussion around that already to this evening. In terms of, obviously the fund's produced its annual report and accounts during the year, so 2021, and alongside that approved the Treasury strategy in September 2020 for that year. Training, as you know, we try to have training as part of every committee, usually at the front end, and try and make it relevant to some of the topics that are actually on the agenda. But there's also been some work taking place around there's a new SIP knowledge and skills framework which we brought to committee, I think it was last time round, and we'll be refreshing the training policy, etc., going forward and working up a new training programme. There's obviously the ad hoc projects that we've again spoken about this evening. So there's the GMP was a major piece of work that took place and was completed during the year. The committee agreed with the relevant under and over payments policy which sat alongside that. And there's been the usual policy reviews which we do on a cyclical review. So things like the pension admin strategy, which actually is being updated again this evening. And then it just sets out broadly what the work programme that was for the current year, which obviously we're coming towards the end of now. So that's basically what's in that report. It's a review of the work of the committee over 2021.
Okay, thank you very much. I in my introduction will probably we'll just stress obviously the really splendid performance of the fund in the year. The one now worth nearly £2 billion. The progress that we've made, particularly on responsible investment, particularly on our carbon target, which we're well ahead of at the moment, and the fact that we managed to save the council around 8 million over the period of the last triennial review as a result of reducing the employer contribution. And we'll add that to that my thanks to everybody in this room and on this call for helping us achieve that. Has anyone got any comments or questions on the report?
Presumably, Chair, you'll be also noting the risks that looking forward. I mean, the problem I've found is these reports always look backwards. And actually, what we need also to do is to warn people about the future and how we're coping with that as well.
I will mention volatility.
Yeah, exactly.
To be, it's yeah. Obviously, this particular report was designed to look backward, and we will cover all those issues are very important to the committee and other items. But yes, volatility is it. Yeah. But I said before, I mean, when we have a really splendid year, it's all down to the splendid work that this committee and our officers do. When things are not so good, it's almost invariably as a result of difficult international market pressures, and the economic crisis. But there we are. Councillor Spence, I think, wanted to come in.
Yeah. So Chair, I've noticed that it's a report covering 2021. So in that sense, I guess it's pretty much a year out of date. So it's reporting on events up to April 2021. Is that correct?
Last year's report, yeah.
Yeah. So, but the question I wanted to raise is under responsible investment. But I'm conscious about the time frame that it's reporting on, because we have discussed in recent months the question about human rights in the context of the occupied Palestinian territories. And I know that the chair, for example, has written a response to a local petition on that very issue. And earlier on this evening, we were referred to the engagement work that is being done by LAPF in that regard too. But I'm guessing that perhaps that's going to be a question for the next report rather than this one, if I'm right in terms of the timing. But I just wanted to flag that up and get it on the record that if it's not in this report, then I would hope that under the section on responsible investment, we would record that is an issue which is coming up. Thank you.
Of course, and we've got an item on it later on the agenda. Thank you. Can we now note the report? Thank you very much. So agenda item 7, pensions admin strategy. So it's Karen McWilliam again. Yes, Karen?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Chair. So the pensions administration strategy is included as an appendix to this item. You'll actually see there's 2 appendices because we've made some changes to the pensions administration strategy, and the second appendix actually highlights the changes that have been made, just to make it clear. Now, the pensions administration strategy does what it says in the tin. It is a really key document in ensuring that, as is the fund, the employers in the fund, and also Equinity all understand their various responsibilities in relation to the administration of the fund, and particularly how scheme member data is actually flowing between all 3. And therefore, it also includes the various service standards, not only of Equinity, but as is the fund and also of the employers. So it is a really key document in ensuring data is updated on a timely basis, and therefore we can provide a really good service to the scheme members. The changes to the pensions administration strategy are outlined in paragraph 7.2 of the covering report, as I say, are highlighted in appendix 2. I just want to draw on what I think are the 2 most significant changes. First of all, we're including some additional requirements in there just to highlight that the employer self-service functionalities, this is what Michael referred to previously, this is the new functionality where employers will be providing information to Equinity via basically an IT system where it uploads information that goes straight into Equinity's system, subject to validations, etc. And this will be done on a monthly basis. Now, this should remove the need for employers to send most of their forms that are sort of required on a day-to-day basis when someone joins the scheme or leaves the scheme or changes their hours. And it also means that the data is going to be updated on a much more timely basis, because quite often you find forms aren't sent, and it's only at year end that we actually find out that those forms aren't sent. So moving to this employer self-service system will mean that the data is much higher quality, everything's being done in a much more timely basis, and you know, the end game is the scheme members get much better quality in the information that they receive. So considering the move to that system, we need the employers to engage with this, because it is a bit of work for them to transition onto these new systems, even though it will in the long term be beneficial for them. So we've added in the requirement that actually when we say it's time to move on to the employer self-service facility, they should move on to it. And if they don't provide their monthly submissions by the regular monthly requirement date, which I think is about the 19th, then they will actually get a charge. We don't call it a fine, it is actually an administration charge for late submission of that data. So we think that's really significant to make sure, hopefully we can encourage the employers to onboard onto the system, but if not, we've got to stick within the pensions administration strategy. And the second key point that I would highlight is we're also adding in a line that if any of the employers don't engage with us in relation to the McLeod data requirements and they don't provide the information required for McLeod, again, there can be an administration charge levied on the employer for that purpose. So that's really the two key elements that I wanted to highlight. There are obviously some other sort of more minor changes to the pensions administration strategy as highlighted, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Thank you. That's a very clear report. Can we then, I think we've got to agree it, haven't we? Yes, approve the updated pension strategy as set out on paper. Now, the next item is the responsible investment timetable. I just note that while I've read it online, there isn't actually a copy of it on the paper agenda, so I haven't got it in front of me. Can I, now, we'll try and deal with that now because it's the timetable rather than the growth as a principle. If in the meantime, I'll just search the internet and find this report. Sorry about that.
Okay, so I'm going to invite Andrew to take us through the main paper for this, which is the timetable, and for work on implementation of the RI policy or development and implementation of RI policy over the coming year, including the work over the next couple of months around refresh of the climate change policy and the broader RI policy for the fund. But also looking at in the longer term, the work that's required over the next year and timetable of that, particularly in terms of the Stewardship Code and requirements for TCFD reporting. One of the big things that's going to come out from Stewardship Code is going to be, it's linked in some way to what we were discussing before, is about fund manager and company engagement and actually doing that as a fund ourselves. And there's some proposals within this paper about a smaller working group made up of officers and members, really so that we can actually commit the time that's going to be required to that. And I think Andrew will go through a bit more detail of that in a minute. So I'll hand over to Andrew to take us through the timetable and pick up.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Chair. So as Michael said, the objective of this is to give a more granular detail of the key milestones and objectives from the RI work that is sort of ahead of the committee over the coming 12 months. And it very much follows on from the work that was done in 2021 and some of those workshops. You'll recall in September we had a workshop where we discussed sustainable development goals. We had some training on TCFD and on stewardship, and we had some initial discussions on the ambitions and targets and objectives that could result from the next step from the committee's discussions on responsible investment. And what this paper does is it sets out, like I say, a detailed plan in the appendix, and there are kind of three main parts to it. Part one is to propose establishing a responsible investment working group to progress these key deliverables, and essentially in doing that, the committee would retain all of the decision making that's relevant for the committee and the fund's progress, and the working group would essentially be responsible for doing the legwork for the committee, reporting back on progress on at least a quarterly basis. And that working group could include, as Michael said, it could include members of the committee who've got time available to do that, recognising it's likely that our IWG might need to engage possibly on a monthly basis or even more frequent at certain points in the year. And what we've done in this paper is we've set out initially draft agenda for the February committee workshop. So the aim of that is to cover a draft climate goal, responsible investment and a responsible investment policy, and work on that has already commenced. And that would essentially be a summary and reflection of some of those discussions around sustainable development goals, for example, that we had in the workshop prior to Christmas in September. We then also just clarify at the bottom of page 1 of the report the committee's responsibilities. As I say, the committee would retain full ownership of all setting of climate goals and key milestones, setting the parameters for the Stewardship Code, signing off the final submission, and approving the annual responsible investment timetable that we would look to build on from following today, and any feedback we have. And also to approve any voting and engagement priorities. One of the discussions earlier with regard to LAP, we noted that LAP share their objectives and priorities periodically, and that will be the same for other relevant stakeholders when it comes to the voting and engagement of the assets that are invested on behalf of the fund. So what I would see is that as we move forward, the responsible investment working group and potentially even rolling into the committee could really engage on with LAP and, let's say, LSIV whenever voting and engagement priorities are set out from an annual basis, so that the views and aspirations of the committee can be reflected whenever those are finalised from an organisational perspective for LAP and for others. And then, as I say, the responsible investment working group would provide a summary note for each committee, summarising what they've been working on over the period between committees, thinking about manager meetings, what the outcomes of those meetings were, maintaining an action log. And I think that's a really important point. There will be lots of work that happens. One of the things that we see as being really beneficial from establishing any form of subcommittee is thinking about, well, what is that work? What's the objective of that work? What actually happened and what was the outcome of that work? And once that outcome takes place, what are the actions, and actually have those actions been addressed? So kind of that objective, outcome, and then action summary log is something that we would look to be the product of their RIWG, and for that to be fed back to the committee. As Michael mentioned, manager meetings would be one of the key priorities. In order to demonstrate engagement, or in order to demonstrate the work that is done by the committee and the responsible investment working group as part of a Stewardship Code submission, it's necessary to meet with the managers and ask them cover a series of areas to delve into their approach to different aspects. Voting engagement, we touched on LAP earlier. I think that it would be an opportunity to have direct engagement with LAP to understand further more other aspects. Chair, obviously you've got that firsthand, but this would be an additional opportunity for members of the RIWG to engage on that side of things, but also other really important stakeholders whenever it comes to voting and engagement. BlackRock are your passive manager. Hermes are the voting and engagement party who have been appointed by London CIV. You bring those three together and you're going to get pretty good visibility of what you can actually achieve from a voting and engagement standpoint as a fund. Also doing some of the legwork on Stewardship Code and meeting all the requirements that sit within that, and identifying those engagement priorities that we've started to work on, but obviously we need to build on. So that's an initial view on what we would envisage the responsibilities of the committee and the responsibilities of the responsible investment working group should the committee agree to sort of move forward with that principle of having a working group to do the legwork. And perhaps Chair, perhaps I'll pause there at the moment just to get any thoughts from the committee on that principle of establishing a responsible investment working group, and then we can go into some of the detail of the timetable and that's included in the paper.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, can I just make 3 initial observations? One is it'd be quite useful to have a separate update of what we're going to be doing in terms of reframing our carbon policy. Just a bit more view on what you think the workshop will actually do. I mean, I could see the reason for it and the need to engage with sorry, not the workshop, the working group will do. I can see its role in actually engaging directly with you know, the CIV and others. You know, we can have direct conversations about responsible investment issues that we probably won't be able to do with a full committee. Yeah, do you want to just update that? Then I'll welcome, obviously, observations from members.
Sure. Sure.
Especially on the carbon policy particularly, and because we want a refresh of that quite quickly.
Yeah, so I think Andrew's going to come on to that when we go through the actual timetable, but the idea is that we look at where we've got to on the current target at the workshop that's coming up, or to be finalised in terms of a date once we've got the final date from True Cost. And then also at the workshop, that workshop discussions around what the refreshed target will be, and then bring that to March committee for formal approval of the new target going forward, and indeed the wider responsible investment policy as well. So that there's quite a bit of work to do over the next couple of months and bring that forward in time for the March committee.
Great. And we've now commissioned True Cost again, have we?
They are commissioned, and they're just, well, we're in discussions with them about timetables, etc. But they are commissioned. They've been formally, commissioned.
With a view to rounding all this off at the committee in March, I understand. Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
That's
So sorry, Tony. The next thing is just to say a little bit more about what the working group, how it work in practice. If you could do, just a minute or two. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. And sorry, just to round off on that as well, I think we view the RI policy as being a kind of an encompassing document which could cover beliefs, but it definitively covers that objective and the sort of milestones that are going to be monitored in order to sort of move towards that objective. In terms of the things that the subgroup would do, I think engagement with managers and demonstration of that engagement to challenge sort of some of the core things that fit around investment, such as investment process, performance, risk management, so on and so forth. That's almost a core part of demonstrating work that you do when it comes to writing a stewardship code submission. So in addition to what we do in terms of our monitoring report, it's kind of stepping that up a notch in terms of engagement with the managers and actually having a regular annual framework for meeting with managers. It's something that officers and advisors have done lots of in the past, but bringing it into a more formal framework so we make sure it's done on an annual basis to cover almost those core investment aspects. But in addition to that, it's an opportunity to set your own agenda in terms of what areas you want to ask them questions on. And those, at high level, you could probably guess what those are in relation to things like climate change, human rights, so on and so forth, what their policies are in certain areas. But actually, you have the opportunity to drive that agenda and make it focused on the things which are your priorities that are set out in your responsible investment policy. So it will join the dots and link between what you've got in your responsible investment policy, what your objectives are as a fund and from the investment strategy, and then understanding exactly what the detail is that the investment managers are actually doing within their mandates with the assets that they have been given by the pension scheme. So that's one aspect of it. But then you've also got to think about, well, there's a framework and guidance in relation to what you write in from a stewardship code perspective, but you want to not start from scratch, but actually make sure you draft it to reflect the way that you do things. So drafting the stewardship code, which is quite time consuming in itself, We've done a few for, we've done one for one investment pool for WPP. We helped them write their stewardship code recently, and I've been involved in a couple for some of my private sector clients, and it's a big piece of work. So it takes a lot of iterations and a lot of detail and covering all the sections that are involved within the requirements of the stewardship code. So it's building on all of those aspects, kind of taking away some of the detail from the let's say the requirement of being even from a workshop perspective, from a committee perspective. But those are some of the, hopefully that gives you a flavour for some of the things that the RIWG would be focusing on. And there is a bit more detail, which I'll come back to in a moment.
Okay, I think that's very helpful. I won't talk anymore. Has anyone else got questions, comments, or points on this? Councillor Desmond?
Yes, this is a very sensitive but critical issue. I very much support ethical investment, and I think we have to be at the forefront. And I do think we have to expand on our Divest programme, which has been extremely successful, innovative, and economically viable. But we also must avoid demonising any country, especially in the context of our IHRA commitments. That doesn't mean that we should ignore human rights, but we have to look at it in a broad way. That's why I support this working group. One of the things I'm most concerned about is our American investment. I want to know what the Americans are charging the small businesses who can't get loans from banks, if they're charging them extortionate interest rates. I mean, are they charging them 20, 25%? I don't know. When we interviewed the proponents of that scheme originally, I had some ethical doubts, and I want to know, even if the investment is successful, whether it's ethical, because there is a level of interest that small businesses can't pay. And I don't want to think that we're charging extortionate interest rates for the benefit of our pensioners. Whilst, of course, I want the pensioners to benefit, I want them to benefit in an ethical manner. This morning I was in Middlesbrough, which some of you will know is up north. What I'd like to see is an opportunity for us to invest in the Levelling Up programme that we generally support, but I believe it has to be done with government guarantees. I believe that we need to be able to invest in the United Kingdom, but because of the high level of risk, we need government guarantees to ensure that where these investments don't work out, our pensioners don't lose out. And it's not really asking very much. So I do think we need to make representations to whoever Her Majesty's government may be in future months and years, to see if investing in infrastructure in places like Teesside, which has huge potential, can be guaranteed to a level we all accept a degree of risk, but not the level of risk that we'd otherwise have to incur. So I think, yes, I want to see ethical investments. No, I don't want to see any country demonized. And yes, I want to see us investing in the United Kingdom as long as it's safe to do so.
Thank you, Michael. I think that was sort of a statement rather than the question, wasn't it? And I think that's very helpful. We should just pick that up going forward, shouldn't we? Councillor Billington.
Yeah, just on a point of information on the issue that Councillor Desmond raises on Middlesbrough, if we are going to develop this further, we should be engaging with the UK Infrastructure Bank, which is supposed to be offering guarantees as part of the way it's capitalised to pension funds to de-risk projects, particularly in the UK. So I think there is an opportunity there, but I would expect that engagement on the shape of that bank is done sort of strategically by LAPF and others to make sure that those guarantees are created in the right way to suit and support what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you again. That's an observation. Councillor Spence.
Yes, Chair. I mean, I very much support the initiative, and I hope the working group will prove to be very effective. I would want, I mean, it's just a suggestion, I'm sure it will be picked up by the working group. It's obviously very important that it's contextualised, the work of the working group. What I mean by that is that we learn from elsewhere, from good practice elsewhere, other pension funds nationally, but also internationally, and from the work of LIP as well. Obviously, we want to work within the context of the wider pension, I don't know what you call it, community, perhaps, in terms of responsible investment.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Can I suggest that we take a reasonably full note of those contributions and make sure sort of that we do consider them as we go forward? And there's quite a lot of points there raised about impact investment as well, which is something we've considered in the past, isn't it? And it's sort of never. You know, we've made a big allocation to infrastructure, renewable infrastructure in the last iteration, but impact investment is probably something we should pick up on our considerations going forward. Councillor Adams.
Yes, just a matter of interest. I just want to know how often will this subcommittee be meeting?
Yeah, can I perhaps ask, is Mike going to answer that, and how you're going to formulate it too?
Yeah.
I'm interested in. I
mean,
I have to say, I mean, there probably would be a formal membership of it, but I would envisage that all members of the pension committee would be welcome to attend it.
Yeah, I mean, we've still got some work to do around the format of it, and I think we're aimed to bring that to the workshop so that we can actually agree that and try and sort out the actual membership between officers, members, etc. In terms of time commitment, I think in the paper, very briefly, it sets out stuff around particularly fund manager and engagement, and we think we'll be meeting with 2 managers per quarter, and that will take a day for each one of those. And then there's all the other work that Andrew spoke about around the Stewardship Code, etc. So I think we need to do some more work around what the actual commitment is. I think the idea of this paper is just to get a broad, if you like, a sounding board to see whether members will actually like that idea and whether it's something that we can take forward, and then we'll do that extra work to bring it for formal agreement of how it will work, etc.
Councillor Billington.
I just want some sort of clarification on why we think we need this working group, bearing in mind we've had a number of workshops on responsible investment, establishing our priorities on ESG and so forth. So I thought as a committee, we'd quite clearly set a sense of direction, and I'm not really clear what the purpose of the working group is beyond what we've already done.
Okay, so it's not to set out the RI policy. You're quite right. We've done all that work, and that's what we'll be bringing to the workshop and the March committee to formalise all that into a formal document. This is to actually implement some of that stuff. So, say fund manager engagement. We don't have the time to bring fund managers to committee. So the idea is that we have a work group. We can actually do that on behalf of the committee. Actually question them around things like human rights, their carbon, climate change, etc., and actually try and have some impact with fund managers around and the companies. And it's just felt that we just haven't got the time in the 4 committee meetings to do that. And there's also a lot of work that we haven't agreed that we're going to sign up to the Stewardship Code. That submission is a lot of work's involved in that as well. And it's about documenting, making sure we've done this thing like for example, the fund manager engagement, etc. So it's actually implementing what the committee's agreed in terms of responsible investment policy, etc. And trying to manage the time really and get more focus on it.
My understanding is the engagement bit really I find that it will be most useful for, because we really just don't have time at committee to bring fund managers along here and interrogate them in depth in the way that we used to many years ago when we met once a month.
I understand that, Chair. I'm just sort of somewhat puzzled. I suppose it's partly my observation that in relation to particularly to climate, although I'm not as familiar with other areas of ESG and responsible investment, there is a big there is a steep learning curve for the industry in understanding really how to interrogate fund managers effectively on this. And I'm not sure we are best placed as lay members of a pensions committee to augment what fund managers, or what you guys do as experts to interrogate those fund managers. There is clearly that more to be done to improve that engagement, but I'm not quite sure how a working group which involves lay members would improve that.
It's difficult to answer at the moment, to be honest. I think we do need that bit of extra work around how it will work and how we can actually use it to the best effect. I don't know whether Andrew's got any, because Andrew's actually implemented it's been involved in this type of work at another couple of other pension funds. I don't know whether we can help on.
Of course, so I think it is that opportunity to delve into things in a little bit more detail. So, for example, if we talk about human rights, it's understanding what the policies and how they relate to specific funds and being able to then articulate that fully to the committee. If it's actually, for example, we looked at the LAP report and they picked out some stocks. So with certain managers, we'll actually look at certain pockets of the portfolio and say, what are the stocks that are contributing most to the carbon intensity, for example, or human rights concerns? Let's talk about those 3, 4, 5 stocks. Challenge the managers on why they own them and what the investment rationale for that is. Consider whether or not, and that might be challenging LSIV, it might be challenging BlackRock, it might be challenging the underlying managers of the strategies, or a combination of those two, to try and influence and exert and articulate the committee's view. I think it's something that is initially going to be essentially taking some of the discussions that we've had in the workshops, but focusing and delving into those in a lot more detail with the managers to get more of a granular understanding of what's in the portfolios, and then bringing that back to the committee to make the decisions. So it's really just delving further into the detail of the mandates to I get a fuller understanding in the first instance, but then really trying to influence what the managers are doing and make sure they're representing the fund in the right way, or potentially then working with the CIV to introduce strategies which do address and meet the requirements of the fund.
Okay, well, what do we think generally? Has other people got views as whether this is the way forward or not?
I mean, I think the idea of involving us more in an understanding is right, but I can understand Polly's point of not wanting to be a substitute for the real detailed questioning for which we are not capable. So I think it's a question of setting the framework for this correctly, because I think the positive could be that we do feel much better informed about something we do care about, which is how the ESG is implemented on the ground. So if we can see it in that sense, I can see an argument.
I suggest that we defer this, that we have a more detailed analysis suggested by Michael of what it would do, possibly in the new year. I'm in favour of it, but I do think we need more clarity as to what it would do, how it would do it, who would do it.
Okay, is there any comments? Sorry, anyone want to come back on that for the officers or advisors side?
Sorry, I might just work. If I could just add, as you know, having been away from a role for just over a year now, I suppose the point I'd really add about member involvement, and something that's sort of been quite clear to me coming back, is particularly looking at the London CIV, where I think engagement from lay members has had a really big impact, because obviously they are a manager, so essentially working for by and for the London funds, and I think engagement with direct engagement between the London CIV and councillors themselves has made, looking back, a really material difference to the type of products that the CIV is now willing to offer. When I think about sort of the sort of earlier incarnations of the CIB, you know, I've come back and they, you know, they've set up the Paris Aligned Fund. We're now invested in it. That type of product, you know, when I look back to say 2017, 2018, that would just not have been available. And that has come about, you know, in a very big contributor to that has been, I think, direct engagement between councillors and the staff at the CIV themselves. So I think it can, under the right circumstances, make quite a significant difference.
Yeah, I must say I agree with that. I think it's if we can convey the strength of feeling, that seems to me that's our job in a sense, is to hear the public, to feel those stresses and make sure the people at frontline understand them. That's not the same thing as doing the job of ensuring that these investments are actually, in technical terms, meeting those objectives. What we can do, surely, is to say something about the strength of feeling. So it's about getting them to listen to us more than anything, isn't it?
Absolutely, that's right. Councillor Spence.
I've got to say, having listened to officers, I mean, I think they've made a very good case for this working group, and I certainly wouldn't support any suggestion that we defer it from today to a later point in time. I mean, Andrew's mentioned, we've been told that there are examples of similar types of working groups run in other pension funds, and we've been told that they've been productive and had good outcomes and have been helpful. So I would fully support the proposal.
Okay, in terms of timescales for, we're meeting again in March, aren't we? I'm assuming that you know we wouldn't have met before March anyway. What was your plan?
Yeah, so the plan is set out in this paper. Actually, it does say that we were looking just for feedback at this meeting, so that we could then bring some more detailed proposals to workshop and then for formal approval at the March meeting.
Oh, well, that's it. I would suggest we do that then. I mean, obviously there's some concerns about becoming overwhelmed, wieldy, or not having the necessary advice or being the knowledge to do that. But obviously, a lot of people have said that. I think the general point is we just don't have time to do this at the committee is accepted. Yes. And the advantages of it are there. So I think if we could agree this is set out here, recognising that you're going to come back in March with more detail anyway, and we can adjust it then. Yeah. Are people broadly happy with that way forward on that? Yeah. Okay. So, are there any other questions on any other aspects of this report? If not, can we? Just pausing slightly. Okay, then can we then note the proposed timetable and just note if the officers note the feedback we've had on the other suggestions. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for all the progress made on that as well. Okay, shall we have a short break now till 10 past, and then we'll finish off with the item on the actuarial review. Can we, before we do that, resolve that we will go into part 2 of the meeting, and I'll ask you to exclude the members of the press and public to do that, and then we can. That means we can turn off the live stream and. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.